in your own words, can you tell us why you are qualified, arguably much overqualified, to talk about regenerative medicine, stem cells, and even organ growth, organ transplantation? Give us a little bit of your background.
Well, certainly. We basically started this work, gosh, several decades ago, before the term regenerative medicine was actually even coined. In fact, stem cells had not yet been discovered. So this was really considered science fiction a few decades ago. But that's when we started the work of trying to create tissues and organs for patients using their own cells.
Yeah, amazing. And where are you now in this process? Not the technical side. I want to get into that, but where are you practicing and what kind of research are you doing?
So basically, we were working on a number of tissues and organs, right? So the whole concept is you to try to use regenerative medicine to make patients' lives better. So a lot of what we do really is we take a small biopsy from the patient, very small, less than half the size of a postage stamp, of the tissue of interest. We then grow and expand those cells outside the body. And then with those cells, we can put them right back into the patient in many ways. We can put the cells back in. We can actually create tissues by hand. We can print them. And then the strategy is you put those back into the patient for actual tissue and organ replacement.
I want to talk about the different list of things that you have potentially utilized and could potentially utilize in the future. But I just want to put this out there that you have actually created organs, actual organs from this process. Is that right?
That's correct. We're basically using the patient's own cells to create these organs. And because we're using the patient's own cells, then you do away with the challenges of rejection. And of course, organ shortage as well.
Right. And I definitely want to get into that topic, but I was doing a little research on you, and I was watching a video from, it must have been 14 years or more ago. And at that point in time, you had actually grown a bladder. And was that implanted at that time as well, clinically?
Yes, it had been implanted clinically.
Amazing. And when was that first done?
Gosh, that was probably around that time, or a little bit before then, if I'm looking at timelines. But basically, uh, really, it was early on, right? Basically, was really trying this new technology on patients, and that we really did not know what to expect long term, really.
Yeah. And
So
did it work?
yeah, thankfully it worked. Those patients are still doing well. We had three tiers of patients during the trial, and so we had three different protocols, and till we arrived at the protocol that worked the best. And those patients are still doing great many years later, and we're pleased with that outcome.
That's amazing. So if that was maybe 2 decades ago, why haven't we heard, I haven't really heard of this much in the news. Certainly, there are still people who are waiting for the transplant list, using other people's organs. Why hasn't this come to fruition at a bigger scale over the last 2 decades? What's holding it up?
Yeah, it takes time and effort. There's several factors. The first one is the complexity of the organs, right? That you're going to implant and their need, how much they're needed. So that also has something to do with it. And the other is just the process that it takes to really bring these technologies to widespread distribution. Even though we do these things in patients, and we still, yeah, and that's the process, right? You go through clinical trials, as you know, and each clinical trial takes several years, and then you have to go through that process until finally. So it is available clinically for many things. It's just one of those things that it takes time for it to be widely disseminated, and we're finally seeing that now, right? We're finally seeing some of these tissues and organs going out there for wide dissemination.
Yeah, and I'll talk about my experience orthopedically, and this really is in the cartilage regeneration space. So we'll get into that, but I wanted to just double click on the organ piece for a second because, again, it's just I have a hard time wrapping my mind around the idea that we can grow it because these are such complex organs, especially when you get into solid organs like the kidney and like the heart. Um, and I've read some people, some scientists who say that this will never happen because they're too complex. The vascularization is too complex. But you don't think that that's true?
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Because we basically, um, you know, now have a number of tissues and organs in patients that have been implanted, and we're still implanting them. We just implanted one just 2 weeks ago. So we keep doing this in patients. Patients keep doing, patients are benefiting from these technologies. And it is a little bit complex, no doubt about it, because you have to go to the patient, you have to take a biopsy of tissue from the patient, you have to expand the cells outside the body, you have to create the construct and put it back into the patient. So there's several steps involved, which is a little bit more complex than just taking a donor organ. But if you think about it, when you take a donor organ, that's also complex, right? There's a wait list. Patients have to die for for an organ to be available, or you have to get a relative, and you have to go through all this workup. And so the process is also complex. But from a scientific standpoint, growing, expanding, and creating tissue is definitely more complex just than taking an organ from a cadaver,
What was it that you just implanted recently?
a vaginal organ.
Interesting. Okay. Wow. So let's talk about the organ recipient process as it goes. So if you were, organ transplantation, this is a complex thing, as you said, but there are some big issues with the idea of organ transplants. So let's talk about two things in here, because I hear sometimes from my patients who don't know better. They'll say, "Oh, well, if my kidneys give out," and this is usually around like taking anti-inflammatories. If my kidneys give out, I'll just get a new one. It's just that easy. But there's two main issues here. One is availability, and then the other is rejection. So can you walk me through the current state of the transplantation situation from those two perspectives?
Absolutely. So the first one is, you got it right on both ends, right? So the shortage is unbelievable, right? The wait list just keeps getting longer and longer, and patients have to wait longer and longer for those organs to be available. And many times patients die. Patients are on a transplant list and they die waiting for that organ because it never came around. It's just this major shortage because you basically have to wait for someone to die to get your organ. Of course, there are other methods that you can use for living donors, but you can't do that for all organs like the lung or for example, like the heart. And so there are limitations on getting organs. The other thing about it is, of course, even if you do get an organ, um, the organ has to be healthy. It has to be the right match. And even when you have the right match, there's a big rejection issue. Many organs reject within 10 years after implantation. The rejection rate is significant in terms that patients do lose those organs because the body does not recognize that organ as their own. And so the body starts to fight that organ like a foreign agent. And they are placed on medications, but those medications have limited effectiveness in some patients
And side effects, right?
and side effects. In fact, if you are on anti-rejection medications, there are a lot of side effects, and the incidence of cancer goes up because you're turning off the defense mechanisms of the patient. So the incidence of infection, the incidence of cancer, those also go up. Plus, the drugs that you're using can also have toxicity in other organs as well. So those medications are a challenge. Of course, many patients do well, but not everyone does well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I would just love to reiterate, it's not just so simple as I'll just get a new one, right? It is a lifelong
Absolutely.
process.
And then
Yeah.
you're waiting for years. You could wait for years. You may die before you get one.
Right. Right. So I'd love to take a step back and maybe start at the beginning of what has been I think an incredible career for you in this kind of what is now called regenerative medicine. Um, but let's go back to your roots. So you started out as a pediatric urologist, is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. Wow. And so I shared with you before we got on, my background in orthopedics and how I've stepped away from surgery, but you're still operating. Is that true? Do you still have a clinical practice?
That's true. Yeah, I'll be in the operating room tomorrow, all day.
Yeah. Amazing. I love hearing stories where people are able to, pursue a passion and still continue what they were originally trained in. And I think it's pretty rare. So congratulations to you for doing that. But what brought you from pediatric urology, a surgical background, into this realm of research? Because you didn't start out there, right? You sort of moved into this at the end of your training. Is that right?
Absolutely. It was towards the end of my training. And, it was the last stage of my training, actually. And the surgeon in chief at Children's Hospital and Harvard Medical School, he called me up to offer me the job for my next training stage. And he said, we're going to add a research year, and we'd love to have you do that extra research year in addition to your clinical training. And but we're giving you the option. And I immediately said, and it was Dr. Reddick, who was a dear colleague and friend and mentor to me. And he loved to tell this story, by the way. He used to love to tell this story. And I said, Dr. Reddick, I'm really not interested in research. I just want to do the clinical track. And he said, you ought to really think about it. And so he gave me a week to think about it, and I did think about it very thoroughly. I talked to my other professors, mentors, colleagues, my wife, and he called back a week later and he said, "Well, will it be the clinical track or the research and clinical track?" And I said, Dr. Reddick, I've really thought about it a lot, and I just want to do the clinical track." And he said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, is your wife home? I'd like to say hi to her." So he got on the phone with my wife. My She got off the phone. She looks at me. "You really ought to do that extra research year." And that was the end of that. That's how I ended up doing the extra research year, and that's what got me interested in research. And of course, I ended up making that a big part of my life.
Yeah, that's
So I
not a move that probably many trainers are doing these days, to call and speak to the spouse. But that's an awesome story of how you got there. In that first year, though, did you dive directly into this work, or how did you get into this side of it?
so the interesting thing about it was that um, you know I did step into a lab. The faculty member who was coming in was not who they had hired for this department was not coming in for about 6 weeks or so. And it really gave me a chance to explore and see what I really wanted to work on. And by a series of circumstances, there were efforts at that time trying to look at liver, see if liver would regenerate by other folks at our institution. Like Jay Vicanti, who was a physician there, and there were other folks that were trying to look at biomaterials, like Bob Blanger at MIT. And basically, I just decided that I would, and there was other people in my department who were, thinking about things for the bladder, like Craig Peters, who was there in our department as well. And so it just was an interesting time, right? Because I had this 6 weeks to really try to decide what I wanted to do. And I just remember writing in my notebook. I just had my brand new lab notebook, and in the top of the page, I said, can we grow organ for a patient? Um, can we grow a bladder? If we grow the cells, will they remain normal? And if we grow the organ, will it remain normal? And 8 years later, we're able to implant that into a patient. So it's just a series of circumstances. By the time the faculty member came by, Michael Freeman, who was actually arrived about 6 weeks later, who also a dear friend and a colleague, he said, "Do you want to work on my project?" And he was working on prostate. And I said, "Well, actually, I'm already working on this other project. Would you help me with mine?" So it was a very unique circumstance where I didn't have a project when I got started, and then Michael helped, and of course, had a lot of people that really were looking for this to succeed. And like anything else, it takes a village, and we were able to get it done.